So we've developed something called Y-finding, and I brought, you can keep them or not, but I have a bunch of these up here, and I'm going to be getting into more detail about it this afternoon. But Y-finding, I couldn't think of a better name for it, but just why are people connected to the things in this way? So the key connectors, and I'll talk a little bit about that now, but I'll get into more detail this afternoon. But really, it's kind of mapping to Maslow's hierarchy of needs in a way where it starts with this basic ease of use and builds into trust. And then we get into identity or ego. And we kind of move up the ladder to connecting to others, connecting with the world. And then the highest level is aspirational. What can I do with it? How does it make me feel? And so if your company is still just at the ease of use, that's okay. That's a little bit more on the practical side of things. The product and the service that you're creating, you have to get past the ease of use before you can move up and build that trust. And so you really need to sort of check off where you want to be on this ladder that does map really cleanly to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And understand that maybe if the CEO wants to get to aspirational, but the thing doesn't even plug in and work, that you need to work on that bottom layer first. So the way I think about it is, you have kind of this rational side of things, and you have this emotional side of things, and again, things that you're just aware of, and you can immediately, if I ask a question, you can repeat it and say what you think, to this sort of more emotional side, things that you're aware and unaware of. And how it maps is if someone says, oh, I just love this. Well, what do they mean? So I'm sorry, green shirt, she has this cup, and the cup is the same cup that I have, and I was looking at it, and I go, I love that cup. And so it's a thermos cup, and I have it, and I bought it in multiple colors. I bought mine in purple. I love purple. And it does not leak, unless you do it wrong, but it doesn't leak in the car. And it keeps the stuff hot for days, practically. Like, you could leave it, and you could drink it overnight, and it's still cold or hot. So, I mean, it just keep going, but I love this, or I love this pen. Why do I love it? So people say, I love it a lot. But in the interview, they don't really know why, and you have to keep laddering down. Why? Why do you love that? What is it about it? Is it the way that it feels in your hand? Is it the effect that it gives you? Is it the color of it? Is it, all these things? First of all, people say, it just works. I just plug it in and it works. That was why AOL was so popular in the beginning. But people loved it. People say, oh, it just meets my needs. It does everything I need it to do. It just knows what I need. So sometimes people will use these words to sort of describe it. They'll say, oh yeah, these are the words that you capture that are like the Kansei type of words that you want to understand, where does it fit in the spectrum? What things are people aware of when they're working with products or services that you guys are building? What are they unaware of that they sort of in the back of their head know that works for them or doesn't work for them, but that you need to know as designers so that you can enhance that feature, make it work even better for them, so that it can really meet their names. And it goes up this scale, again, into actual lifestyle integration, but in a way maps to that, again, ease of use, trust, identity. Identity has ego in it also. Connection, aspiration. Now, as we went through a number of research projects and collected these words and organized them and mapped them, and it's not super easy. I mean, you do have to do a lot of legwork into figuring out how they kind of cluster together. There were a couple outliers. One of them was it's just fun, and another one was it's addicting. And they're kind of outliers, and it's still not incorrect, but you can understand if clicking that pen just feels good and it's addicting and there's just something about it, I can't really define it, why it feels good. That's more of addictive behavior. It's not on this meaningful map here, but it's not wrong, but it's just something to be aware of, that there's outliers to this.
Gregory Walton has done a lot of research on this. He found he would bring people in for the experiment, and they'd be sitting, and there'd be someone on a treadmill, jogging on a treadmill in the room. And if the experimenter would mention to the person that came in and sat down and say, oh, Bill over there, he's doing a different experiment, he's jogging over there. Did you know that you guys have the same birthday? The person sitting's heart rate will start to match the jogger when all they have in common is that they have the same birth date, right? This is how biologically strong this is. So what we find, this is one of the quiz questions, is that actually when you refer to nouns, that will often get more behavior than verbs. So Walton did this research. He would call people up. He'd say, how important is it to you to be a voter in tomorrow's election? Versus, how important is it to you to vote in tomorrow's election? And when he said be a voter, that invokes a sense of group, right? I'm not just going to vote, I am actually a voter. It is invoking the self-persona. It says I'm one of those people who vote. I have actually been using this. I've been experimenting with this, and I've had my clients use it. I have a nonprofit client who wanted more donations coming through their website, and they had a button that said donate now. And I said switch it to be a donor. Right? Be a donor. And that raised their donation level, just switching the word. Because now I'm a person, I'm a donor. I'm part of this group. And then we even experimented more. Be a member of the organization, not just a donor, but be a member. So these words that we use can be really powerful if they invoke a sense of belonging. Along with this need to belong, Latane and Darley did research on social validation. So they would take someone, an actor, and they'd dress him up in a way where you couldn't tell, he wasn't dressed really nice, he wasn't exactly dressed badly, but kind of in between. And then they'd have him like go over and kind of and moan, and you couldn't tell, is he hurt, is he sick, is he having a heart attack, is he drunk, what's the problem? And then they would see, would people stop and give him help? And what they found was that when people came by, if one person came by, they would give help 85% of the time. But if there was a group of people coming by, they would give help much less, 31% of the time. And the reason is, if you came by and there were other people around, you'd look to see, are you going to help? Are you going to help? No, nobody's helping. Okay, I'm not going to help either. We're very affected by other people, which is why, of course, reviews and ratings and testimonials are so powerful, really powerful. This guy, Chen, tested whether, what was more powerful, reviews and ratings by other people kind of like me versus reviews and ratings from the website owner versus ratings from an expert. And all three had an effect, but the most powerful was if I thought the ratings and reviews were from people like me, right, part of my group.
There are other life cycles, there are other ways to look at this process, and that's usually the problem that I see when I go to an organization. I could see things like someone is hired to run their website, probably also handle all of their thank yous for donors and stuff like that, and then they add social media onto the job description. You're talking about a 23-year-old who went from intern to this role. Now they're in charge of basically all of your online communication, and they don't know how to do it. The CMS is Joomla, let's say. There are all kinds of reasons that they can't really keep up with the website, so they put their emphasis on their Facebook page. And they're doing a great job. They're getting likes, and she's good at it, and she likes it. So they just abandon the website. Everybody sort of abandons the website. It's no one's responsibility anymore. And you're just like, well, we'll just wait till it totally breaks, and we have to do a redesign. But there's no connection between what she's doing on Facebook meaning anything to this organization. Is it helping bring in donations? Is it helping attract people to what we do? No one was thinking about it. No one was talking about it. Or I've seen organizations where people have a very strict mission and vision, and they only put their goals out, and they try to make every channel fit that goal. And they've got no tread. No one is paying attention to what they're doing socially, because all they do is push one thing. That's why I try to think about audits existing in a larger life cycle. My second premise is that there is an ecosystem for content. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Information architecture is no longer about having a model of a house. I mean, for me, it's either like urban planning, where you're talking about a moving city, or just the idea of being a living, breathing organism. Your content changes, it grows, it changes with the relationships that you have with people around it. So when we audit, we are always really going beyond one channel. We're looking at the relationship of how that content relates. That's the word holistic. How our relationship to our time and our place and our person affect the whole of what we're doing. There are a lot of other words for holistic. You might be familiar with some of these. I am very fond of the term multi-channel. It makes a lot of sense to me. Though I thought we created the term omni-channel at an IA summit one year in a hotel bar, but apparently it's become quite popular. UX should always be holistic. We are not just making a product. We're building an experience. And that happens in a location, in a retail store. It happens with our staff when they talk to people. It happens on every channel that we use. And there's no point in looking at those things as separated, even if we assign different people to do different channels. So this is my third thing. When people are resistant to the idea of doing content audits, just try to remember the first time we make something, even if we're building it off the very best user research, an absolute wonderful foundation of personas, we're still guessing. I mean, they can be educated guesses, but they are suppositions. When we get to the stage where we're able to audit content or conversations that we're having, we're testing. It's a form of test. And that helps us know that we're reaching our goals and our audiences and providing the experience that we want to have.
We need some other ways of working that are not defined just to that project scope. We need some other tools to use to tackle what's happening on this other side. So I have some ways that I've started to do that when it comes to content, and I want to share a few of them with you. I think the first thing is that we're thinking about content as a team sport. We have to say this is not something that's one person's responsibility. I might be the content strategist on your project, but I tell you what, I cannot control all that content. Particularly if you're dealing with anything larger than like a little teeny tiny website. If you're dealing with a whole organization, even just a complex group, you have to think about content as something that multiple people are going to be involved in from the very beginning. And how do you wrangle multiple people? How do you get a bunch of people to provide input? I found that it's really useful for me in my work to look at it as a series of workshops, of activity-focused days where we bring people together. Not just at the very beginning, although that's very important, but to bring them together all the way through to work through content in a parallel process while people are also working through all of this stuff that goes into your particular UX process. I try to pull people together and get their input into a few different things. These are some of the common ones I use. First one's messaging. So when I start talking about messaging with people, what I'm really trying to get at is, who are we? What's important? What's true to us? And there's lots of ways you can workshop with this to get people involved. This image is an example of something I lovingly call the Margot method. Margot Bloomstein has this thing she talks about a lot. And if you ever pick up her book, it's called Content Strategy at Work. She talks about a lot of different activities like this. I love this one where it's all about card sorting, but it's card sorting personality traits, card sorting who your brand actually is. I've also done this in different ways. I've done this with things like Mad Libs. I've done this with surveys when I couldn't get people together. I've done it with like timed activities where people had to draft and agree to a statement. But here's what's key about this. This isn't just about saying, okay, sort these cards and tell me who you are. The way this works is you sit down and you go, okay, we have all of these different cards. We're going to sort them into categories based off of who we are right now, who we want to be, and who we're not. Okay, that's valuable in and of itself. But here's what's really cool about it. You put these little tactile objects in front of people, and you make them actually talk about them, and you listen to the conversations that happen. And what you start hearing is all the different ways that people in different groups have different perceptions about what's important. You start hearing the disagreements. You start hearing the things that are like, well, I mean, we'd like to be imaginative, but are we really imaginative? I mean, you know how everything always gets squashed and this happens, whatever. You hear that stuff. And those are things that you will not hear otherwise. And you will learn a tremendous amount if you stop and listen to those conversations about where that organization is right now and how far they can be pushed. Also, you'll come out of that with people who are really rallying around a few key terms, and you can use that as a starting point. You can use that as a starting point for getting them to focus on their content and say, you've said you need all 47 of these things on the home page. Let's go back and look at our messaging. How many of them actually match that?
The y-axis is life expectancy. The higher up the dots go, the longer people are living. It starts at about 40 years and goes up to 90. The x-axis is percentage of healthy years. What do we call healthy? Free of long-term illness, long-term disability. It starts at about, 79%, goes up to about 89%. So the further right we plot, the healthier people are. In 1990, the Global Burden of Disease Commission did a study, and they profiled 246 industrialized countries against this graph. It looked like this. So, okay, what's that mean? Well, it means that in 1990, we could expect to live between, say, 50 and 80 years and have about, I don't know, say 82 to 88% of those years be reasonably healthy. Fine. Fast forward 22 years. They did the study again. It looked a little different. Dot slid up, meaning people are living longer. Dot slid to the left, meaning people aren't necessarily living healthier as they get older. If you live in the United States and if you're a male, you can expect to live 10 years with a disability. If you're female, 13 years. This I also think about quite a bit because I work in this odd kind of cross-section of healthcare and technology and accessibility and these things, and my clients span a lot of in the sort of healthcare pharmaceutical space. And I'm always struck by the gap between what the potential of technology and what we expect technology to do, depending upon what we care about at the time that we care about it. Now, that made no sense, so I'm going to give you an example. Last summer, this guy gets into a little metal hut, closes the door. He goes up, 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 up in the sky, 21 miles in the sky, not quite to outer space, but darn close. While he's up there, he opens the door, which is a perfectly sane thing to do, looks around, leaps out, goes down, 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 hits the ground, gets up, walks away. We all watched it live, didn't we? So we can do that, and yet if we had to try to make a capture that a blind person can use, that's impossible almost. You would not believe how many discussions I have around this. Can we please make this application accessible to people with disabilities? That's really hard. Can we drop a man from outer space? Sure. What could possibly go wrong? I know why this happens. Robin Christopherson told The Guardian UK that the reason this happens is because accessibility is traditionally an afterthought, a bolt-on, a nice to have. If we have the time, if we have the budget, if we get sued, if Cal doesn't stop talking, right? And, we start to layer up these what-ifs and these contingencies. Accessibility is really ugly. If we do that, it's going to depreciate the visual value of it. It's expensive. It costs a lot of money to do that. Accessibility is not very marketable. We can't do that. It's not innovative. Not innovative. I kind of pause there because I think, I have data against the other three, the first three. I can kind of prove that. I can say if you bring in accessibility earlier in the cycle, you somewhat mitigate those first three things. But how do you prove accessibility is innovative? So that's what I'm going to talk about.
Stories do one other thing, which is that they create relationships. When we think about storytelling, we usually think about the storyteller. Or maybe we think about the story. But the real important thing that happens is that, first of all, there's a relationship between the storyteller and the story they choose to tell. There's a relationship between the story and how it's heard by the people who listen to it. But most importantly, stories create the bottom line of that triangle, right? They create the relationship between the storyteller and the story listeners, right? They create that feedback loop. As UX researchers, we actually do a double loop, right? Because we create a triangle between us and the people we research, right? And the users that we research. And then we bring that story back, and we create a triangle between the stories we heard and the things we bring back to talk to our developers about. And the whole point of that is to create a third triangle that connects the people working on the product team, all of us, with the people out there we're working for, and make that connection, even if they haven't been able to be part of that research, even if they came in late to the project or don't get sent out. That's one of the things that stories can do, is bring that together. And one of the reasons that's important is because a story can be shared in an emotional way that facts and details and I love the stuff on the walls. I live and die by Post-it notes, right? But in the end, Post-it notes are a means to an end. This is just a quick story that's actually a personal story. I was in London. I was visiting friends who live about an hour outside of London, and I decided to go in to see a play because I used to work in theater, love to see theater. And they gave me instructions about how to get home, I think as though I'd never seen a transit system or a city before. They were night buses and which stop it was and how I had to be there. And they said, really, watch the train times, because after 9 o'clock, there's only 2 trains an hour. Now, they heard this as a big disaster and a failure of the British rail system because they're used to, having really minimal waits. But I live in a place where there are 2 buses after 9 o'clock and one is at 12:30 in the morning, right? So I heard, wow, 2 trains an hour, how amazing, right? How wonderful that is. So same fact, 2 completely different reactions to it. Probably some more reactions from other people. Don't like trains, do like trains, night buses are crazy. And stories can help you bring all of those things together by not just communicating the fact, but adding to it with what the meaning of that fact is to the people hearing it. Because maybe it's not the same for the entire audience. Maybe it is. But that's one of the things you can do is convey the emotion and the meaning assigned to that information.
Okay, so what do you need to do about this? Well, the first thing is you've got to learn the mobile paradigm. That is really hard for an existing computer development group to do. The best practice that we're seeing in developers is they set up a separate team that just works on mobile full-time. And in fact, we know some companies that have a separate iOS team and a separate Android team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, usually when we talk to our clients about this stuff, they get really horrified because they don't have enough resources to do that. So at a minimum, what you need is you need a product manager who really knows mobile and is full-time mobile and can then harangue everybody else about what they don't understand about what's going on in the mobile space. Second thing, separate what you do from how you do it. Best example of this is look at what Windows did with Windows Mobile, Windows Phone. For a long time, Microsoft focused on trying to take the entire Windows experience and cram it into a phone. You even had a little start menu and stuff like that. They didn't really start to get traction until they threw that all out and they created this new version that was entirely designed around touchscreens and mobility. The problem is by the time they did it, Apple and Android had built up so much momentum that it was probably too late for them, and they continue to struggle today. Third thing is break down your application. What do people most need to do when they are mobile? And make those things the most prominent, even if they're not the most prominent thing on your desktop site. In some cases, it may be better to do a series of rifle shot applications rather than one big thing that's trying to do everything. If you look at what Facebook is doing going forward, it looks like they're starting to try to do different sorts of rifle shots. And then finally, and this is a piece of advice that goes back to when I was at Palm, you want to focus on the mainstream 80% of your users. The top 20%, the people who are the noisiest, the ones you will hear from the most online, are usually people who will demand too many features, and especially in a smartphone setting where you've got limited screen real estate and limited resources, they will force you to over-design the application or the website to the point where it's not usable by a typical person. It's better to design for the middle and then find ways to mollify the people at the high end. Put those features a couple level down or something like that. Now, this is a really tricky balance to hit, and it varies some depending on what you're creating. If you've got a game application that monetizes by selling just to the top 10% of users, then probably you want to change your priorities. But for most websites and applications, we recommend focusing on the 80%.
So we have all of these technologies all surrounding us, permeating our lives, but there's a problem. And this is where our opportunity is. Every single one of you in this room can change the world. And I actually truly fundamentally believe that because integrated experiences with this technology, with digital, with physical, are few and far between because, as we said, we live our lives across digital and physical. How many people saw Andrew Hinton speak? Did anyone in here? I think he was here yesterday, or maybe it's today. He's later today. He's great. This is, actually his perspective from a couple of years ago. The web is not so much technology anymore as a way of being. It's soaking into the pores of our physical lives. And, when he initially wrote this, again, 2-3 years ago at least, so today even more so. A few statistics from Google. 90% of consumers move between devices to complete a task. 40% of smartphone users watch TV while browsing their smartphone. I actually think that's low. If that feels low, I'd be interested to know sort of the demographics of that. 65% of multi-screen consumers report that they begun their shopping process from a smartphone. That's huge. And all of these are growing. 84% of all multi-screen shopping experiences included mobile either as the first or second interaction. We are waking up next to our devices, sometimes under our pillow with the alarm set. So we have to design experiences for all of these touch points across all channels. And really, truly, the future belongs to brands that create the best customer experience experiences across all channels. And what's interesting is that this is something that has a marked impact on things like revenue. Consumers cited their greatest frustration as when the experience does not match the promise a company made to them up front. So with my situation with Flying with the Cats, I felt promised, not outright, but I felt promised from United that, my cats would fly and it would be, a fairly straightforward process and that people would help us along the way as needed. That didn't happen. 86% of consumers will pay more for a better customer experience. And only 1% of consumers feel that their expectations for a good customer experience are met. So massive, massive opportunity, job security. There's, in fact, even just in the time I've started talking about all this stuff, the amount of jobs in the customer experience area, which I'll talk a little bit more about sort of what that distinction is, has magnified, it's grown, it's crazy.